Hello everyone, I am the Calm Reader, and today we are continuing our read on Bendy, the Lost Ones. I will be having some lo-fi playing in the background. If you guys have any suggestions for songs, please let me know so I can play it in the next video. But without further ado, let's get on with this book. And thank you all for showing me the support that I need as an upcoming creator. Alright, Chapter 2, Constance. It's a long way down to the murky depths. These were the kind of poetic flourishes, as my father called it, that my brain couldn't help but muster. In the most inconvenient of times. After all, I had agreed to this. Hadn't I even offered? I wanted to help. Poor Molly was just too under the weather, and it wasn't fair to put her through this. And Lily was afraid of horses after all. Yet here I was, pulling at the corners of my cap, trying to keep warm at the stiff October breeze as I stood there, 60 feet in the air. "Is everything okay down there?" I called out again. My first attempt had gone unanswered. I arched my back slightly, stretched my neck to see if I could get a see what was going on in the crowd that gathered below. The rich kid finally looked up, held his hat in place, and waved, "Everything is just fine." I nodded, but to be perfectly honest, I didn't believe him. What did rich kids know about fine? What was a rich kid's definition of fine anyway? I figured our fines had to be very different. But what was I going to do? Climb back down the stairs? Well, yes, that was the thing I very reasonably could do. But I wasn't going to, because I'm a team player. Again, as my father said, I didn't make a fuss. I did what was needed to get the job done. There wasn't space in our little apartment for me to make fusses, not with Molly's star on the rise and Lily's particular brand of narcissism coming. Being promoted to the chorus at the Black Diamond Lounge was definitely not helping there. No room for Constance to complain. No room for Constance to have much of a personality at all. Keep your head down, Constance. Do the job. Get it done. I shifted my gaze out towards the stands. They were full, but they'd been carefully orchestrated by the rich kid's dad. Mr. Chambers could pay for an audience, and he needed an audience for his little movie. After all, this time of year, with the tourists slowly thinning out, getting locals to the Steel Pier to watch another horse diving show was not exactly without its challenges. Add to that the rider was a nobody, who had at the last minute replaced her very fabulous somebody's sister. Well, when you play the audience, it's a very different crowd. They were restless. I could feel it even all the way up here. They were cold too. Like me, Mr. Chambers had likely not counted on this northerly wind for his big shoot. And like me, they were all dressed as if it was summer. No, not quite in their bathing suits. Nothing else. But light dresses and linen slacks. I was glad they were in their bathing suits. Lily always said that when she was nervous, she would imagine the audience in their skivvies. But I never understood that. She clearly lacked the second-hand embarrassment gene that I had inherited from our mother. "Oh dear, no, don't think like that," she had said in response to Lily being outrageous. Which, of course, why she was being outrageous in the first place. I had nothing to say, just keep my head down. I wanted to say that the thought of the whole audience of people of all sizes, shapes, and genders in their underthings, it made me blush, more uncomfortable, not less. No, I was happy to just try and ignore the audience altogether. Fortunately, when one was up on the diving platform as one was now, the distance from the audience was such that you could barely make out individuals. Just a frustrated mass, a blob, an anxious, waiting blob. The platform began to shook, and I grabbed the metal railing beside me. My stomach lurched into my throat. Was this thing about to collapse? Was that what all the fuss had been about? My potential imminent demise? "You mean falling to your death," I heard my father say in my head. "Yes, father. That would be what I mean. but I think in fancy words, even as my life comes to an abrupt end. I'll tell you one thing. I'm never helping Molly out of a tight spot again, that's for sure. And I'll be haunting the heck out of her. I looked down this long set of stairs and see a young man I didn't recognize was slowly climbing up with Trix in tow. Oh, excuse me. I see. It was time. The shake had been perfectly safe. That kind of shake is to be expected. Not the kind of shake that, well, isn't. Trix did look fine. She was brushed to a sheen, her mane was blowing in the wind like she knew she was the star, and it was likely she did. I always gave her too much credit, but I give too much credit to animals too. Even Molly said as much, but I just thought, how can they have feelings and opinions and such, but not be like us? They know us, they recognize us, surely they ought to mean they like us, or don't as well. Trix was beautiful, she was kind, she loved everyone. She was Molly's horse. But she was so sweet when I rode her, I could tell she enjoyed our time together. Did she enjoy diving into a pool of water 60 feet below? I wasn't so sure about that. But she never complained. She kept her head down, just like me. Hi there, I said. The young man was so close now I was feeling a bit strange just standing there, waiting. I suppose that's what Molly always did. It was her. She was the star. The horse brought her. There was no one outside that world. But how can you just ignore a person who was right there? Hi, he said. He smiled, and I figured he was about my age, 17 or 18. But he looked tired. And what was that wonderful term? World-weary. That was the one. Like he had something heavy on his mind. Thank you for doing this. I'm guessing Steve didn't show up, I said. I knew I sounded awkward. I was terrible at small talk. I don't know. But they needed someone to help out. He gleamed down at the ramp and took a step forward. I'm like that, I quickly said. He furrowed his brow at me. Like what? Oh, just when someone needs help, I help. I was beginning to say I appreciated that you helped, that is. I understand why you volunteered. Why was I still talking? I could tell from his body language he just wanted to get off the platform. Okay, he replied. He glanced down again. I followed his look. A small crowd, including the rich kid and his father, was standing at the base of the ramp. Look, I need to get back down, so do you need help up? Huh, back down, help up? Look, I need help. I said. That was stupid. Well, do you? Oh, yes I do. I definitely needed help up. I needed all the help I could get. Clearly, forget the thought of the audience in their underwear making me blush. My own words coming out of my own mouth were more than effective at that. Oh, why couldn't my brain be as articulate outside my head as it was in it? Trapped in my own brain. That's what it felt like sometimes. All these feelings, these frustrations, just bubbling away, unable to get out. So what did I do? He was getting tired of me. So what do I do? I was taking too long. I wasn't being professional. Oh, just hold her steady while I get on. She's a good little lady. She'll be easygoing, though. That sounded like somewhat decent thing to say. The young man nodded. Need any help? Called out the rich father just then. I didn't sound like a real concern because it wasn't. It was an instruction. Get on with it. I guess we had to get on with it, I said. I guess. The young man held Trix's bridle with slightly more conviction than before. He planted himself in a wide stance. I noticed and quickly jumped on her back. It was similar to riding bareback, aside from the bumper she wore on her shoulders that attached around her front and prevented me from slipping too far forward when we dove together. It was for everyone's safety, hers and mine, that there wasn't a saddle or reins or stirrups. Once in the water, we needed to break free from each other quite easily. You all set? Asked the young man as I shifted my position slightly. Oh, yes, I said, looking down at him. Yes, thank you so much. I'll go then. He seemed unsure, but of course. He had never done this before, I assumed. Yes, please. I was trying to get it done and dealt, but I was terribly nervous. I hoped I didn't sound curt with my reply. Oh, dang it. Oh, maybe I did. My name's Constance, by the way, I said, turning to him as he started his descent. He looked back at me. I know. He turned around once more, and I felt like an idiot again, though I honestly wasn't sure why this time. I turned back and leaned down to pet Trix's neck. Well, I'm an idiot, aren't I, girl? I whispered into her ear. She gave me a short snort, and then I laughed a little. You're not supposed to agree. Whenever you're ready, there was the rich kid's father again. I hated to think it, but I was pretty sure at this point I wasn't well fond of him. We're rolling. Whenever I was ready, and yet it felt quite the opposite. They were ready. It was time. Oh boy, was I ever scared. No, I was supposed to call it nerves. Never scared. Never scared. Scared is the same thing. Scared is not the same thing. Lily had insisted. Not the same thing. Scared holds you back. Nerves push you forward. Come on, Trix. Let's get this thing done. Then we both can go home. She snorted again, and I guided her out farther on the platform. Then her hooves were just before the diving ramp. Though one could hardly call a piece of wood that hung over and down from the platform at a 90-degree angle facing towards the water a ramp. Exactly. I leaned into Trix's neck. I felt her mane against my cheek, coarse but warm, with that wonderful smell of dry hay. Course, I squeezed with my arms and legs, holding my body as close to hers as I can. Okay, Trix, it's time. Let's fly. I squeezed her sides hard with a sharp single motion, and she stepped out onto the diving board. And then we were in the sky. The speed was sudden, the cold wind rushed around us like it was alive. It was mere seconds, and then the water rose to greet us. I closed my eyes. Keep your head down, Constance. Do the job. Get it done. Chapter 3. Brand. Let's talk about telling a story. Let's talk about narrative decisions and point of view and what you want to say, what you really want to say. Let's talk about shaping public opinion and leading a number of readers in a particular direction. Let's talk about how even when a story is based in fact and telling the complete truth, it has its bias. Let's talk about journalism and integrity. Let's talk about freezing your butt off in the middle of October while some rich folks try to pretend it's not. Let's talk about horses in the sky and girls in bathing suits and a crowd of paid spectators cheering on cue. Let's talk about all these people and standing right there in the midst of it all being totally and completely invisible. Oh yes, let's talk about that especially. How many journalists try and disappear, try to observe quietly, get the story, the real story, as if their own personal stories don't affect the words they write. Let's talk about how none of them really know what it means to be invisible. Being from the wrong side of the tracks, as they say, not being born in a family of writers, not growing up with any expectations of going to college, not graduating from high school, just wanting to write. So, you get a job in the mailroom of a newspaper instead. You've been a quality errand boy. Still, they don't see you, but you see everything, until they do see you. You there! Me there. I was shaken by my thoughts, probably a good thing. They were getting far too full of self-pity for myself. I pointed at myself, aware I was me and aware I was there, but shocked that this large man in a large winter jacket with a large fur wrap could even notice me. Yes, you, stop pointing yourself like that. Take the horse up to the girl. I stared at him for a moment. Well, that is to say, I stared in his direction. I was thinking, processing his command. I understood that there was no way he'd known I was there for journalistic reasons. But what on earth made him think I had any horse-talking capabilities? And that was quite something else. Do you understand me? He spoke slower this time, like he was talking to someone who didn't speak the language, or a child, the way some adults talk to some kids, if they are stupid and not just figuring stuff out. I nodded. Then do it! Well now, just because I understood didn't mean I had to obey him. I turned to Mr. Clark. Just do it, Brant. I know. But let's not get this darn day over with already. Let's just get it done. Sir, I'm not crazy about horses, I replied. I said hesitantly. I wasn't really keen to share the fact about myself. I found it pretty embarrassing to tell the truth. After all, horses were a part of everyday life, especially here in Atlantic City. pulling in ornate carriages for lovers on the boardwalk, that kind of thing. Just do it and I'll make it up to you. I want a byline, I said quickly. I knew when to take advantage of the moment. That was certainly one thing I was good at. My uncle had instilled that into me when I was little. Say yes to any opportunity you get. You'd better believe all the other folks are. Brent, I just can't give you that. Clark, Mr. Clark shook his head sadly, and that weary expression materialized on his face. I saw it a lot more these days. He was a tired man. Well, I wasn't tired. Not yet. I was young. I was a new man myself. I had the birthday smacks from my little cousins to prove it. 18 and ready to say yes to all the opportunities. Maybe not all of them, but I was ready to say yes to all the general ones. I was more than ready. Mr. Clark, I'm not kidding. I want a byline. You're a kid, he said, almost more to himself than anything. I was a kid bringing you your lunch. You were the one who saw my potential, who really saw me. Didn't see through me like most. I know you see me, Mr. Clark, Brant, and I know as of 2 days ago, I'm an adult under the law. And more than that, you always treated me fairly. I know you see something in me. You brought me here today to watch your work, watch you learn. So I want a byline. I want to still bring you your lunch. I still will hold your hat, but I want a byline. So, he was in silence for a moment. I knew I was pushing things. Where's that boy with the horse? I heard that large man say. Clearly, I had turned invisible again. I was right here, exactly where I'd been the last time he'd seen me. He could have looked just a foot or two to the right, but he was too busy complaining that I hadn't done the job yet. If I give you a byline, son, said Mr. Clark, lowering his voice, though no one was listening to us in the first place, I can't guarantee publication. You're still green. You're still learning the trade. I understand, Mr. Clark, but I just want the chance to prove myself. I don't expect any favors. Like getting a byline? I couldn't help but grin, and it was okay, because Mr. Clark had this small smile on his face, curling the edge of his lips. Almost imperceivable. But you notice things like that when you were when you were someone like me. Hey now, that's just good business. We're just making a deal. Just making a deal? Well, Brant, I can't believe I'm agreeing to this, but yes, let's find you a name and get you a byline. Thank you, sir. You won't regret it. I already do. His smile grew just a tiny bit wider. Now, you'd better get that horse to that girl, because I'm freezing my rear end out here. I think I found the subject of my first article, I joked. Brant! I laughed and held up my hands. Okay. I turned and made my way to the staging area. I didn't actually know where the horse was hiding, but I figured it was a good place to start. Sure enough, I found it, standing in a small makeshift shelter being cared for by an old, hunched man who reminded me an awful lot of Mr. Doyle from my neighborhood. I walked up to him. Hey, so I have to take the horse to the girl, I said. The old man looked at me with deep suspicion. So, what do I do here? Are there any reins or a rope or anything? I looked at the horse, even though I'd been avoiding it up until now. Man, that animal looked huge this close up. Now, I wasn't exactly what you'd call scared of horses. Maybe it was more that they were scared of me. After all, how else could you explain being tossed off every single one you'd ever tried to ride? Made me happy to live in a time where most folks drove cars. Reins get in the way. Just take her by the bridle. She'll docile enough. Good little lady, replied the old man. Little? Hardly. So I don't know what to say. I stared at the beast. She was beautiful, a rich chestnut brown with a white star in the middle of her forehead, but she was still a beast. The bridle you just grab fast and later, and you can't do this yourself because... The old man scoffed. Look at me, son. These folks don't want me out there in the public. Besides, I'm not too fond of heights. Well, I'm not too fond, of horses, I thought, but I didn't say it. You better get going. I'm not getting in trouble because you're scared of horses. I'm not, I said, a little too harshly. Her name's Trix. She'll follow you. Hi there, Trix, I said, trying to calm my nerves. The horse didn't seem to acknowledge my existence. What else was new? I reached up and gently gripped the bridle. My knuckles brushed against her fur, and I flinched slightly in anticipation of her anger. But she did nothing. Just stood there, patiently. Good girl, I said, my heart in my throat. Apologies. Man, this is really embarrassing feeling this way. Just deal with it, Brant. Be a grown-up for crying out loud. I wasn't sure what to do next, so I just started to walk towards the platform. Sure enough, as the old man had said, Trix followed me. Walked right next to me, those giant hooves clicking on the metallic stage as we approached the stairs to the platform. About time, I heard someone say as we materialized around the corner. I didn't look in their direction. I was too focused on not being trampled to death. The stairs up to the diving platform loomed in front of me. They were erect on a low angle, obviously to allow a horse to climb them. They were shallow, too, making the whole thing appear ramp-like. It also had an effect on making the girl at the top appear so much more further away. Why was I doing this, and why did it seem like the task would never end? I guided Trix onto the first step, and she took it easily. I felt her gently pull as she realized what was what. Whether she saw her rider at the top, the brunette in the bathing suit, probably freezing to death in this weather, but looking as sincere as any bathing beauty on the beach, or whether she was excited to do the dive, which made no sense to me at all. I don't know, but she seemed to want to get to the top, so I sped up my walk and decided to keep my gaze forward and up, not on the horse, and not on the ground, as it was falling away from us. The platform shook as we walked. Oh, that was fun. The girl turned and noticed us, and then I averted my gaze. I didn't think she wanted some guy just staring at her the way I knew I was. It wasn't about her, of course. I just needed to stare at something, but it probably came across as impolite. I looked instead at her feet. They were bare. How was she not completely frozen through? Hi there, she said suddenly. It took me by surprise. I hadn't been so focused and was not expecting any conversation at the moment. Hi, I replied. I smiled because I didn't know what to think. I was scared about this. The shame burned inside me. If she wasn't scared and she was about to sit on this giant animal and step out in the sky riding it, well, I at least could pretend to be at ease. Thank you for doing this. I'm guessing Steve didn't show up, she said. I have no idea who Steve is. Was she just making small talk up here in the sky? I don't know, I replied, but I needed someone to help out. I felt myself step backward even as Trix moved her head to pull me forward. I like that, she said. Like what? I was more confused now than ever. Oh, just when someone needs help, I help. I was meaning to say I appreciate it that you helped. That is, I understand why you volunteered. Why was she still talking? I just wanted to take the bridle. I just wanted her to take the bridle already. That was not a job I had volunteered for, lady. Okay, I said. I glanced down again, looking at the small crowd gathered around the base of the platform. Was something actually broken? Was this thing about to collapse? Look, I need to get back down there. So do you need help up? Back down, help up, she said. No, it sounded like she was speaking in riddles. What was it about performers and their personalities? Well, do you? Oh, yes, I do. Great. I kind of hoped that she was going to say no, but I offered because that's what a gentleman does. Right, Uncle? So, what do I do? I had a moment of absolute fear that she needed me to lift her onto the horse. Holding a half-naked girl was not something I was prepared to do. Oh, just hold her steady while I get on. She's a good little lady. She'll be easygoing, though. Yeah, that's what the old man had said, too. Not that he'd proven wrong yet, but horses can surprise you. I just nodded. Need any help? Cried out the large man just then. He didn't sound actually worried or like he was sincerely offering or anything. Likely, it had because we hadn't started. He was ordering us both to get on with it. She understood too, obviously. I guess. I held on tight as the girl seemed to defy gravity and jumped on Trix's back. For her part, Trix barely moved, was steady as a rock. My presence probably not needed at all. I glanced up and watched as the girl settled herself onto her position. "You all set?" I asked. "Oh, yes," she replied, looking down at me with a charming smile. "Yes, thank you. Okay, so now what?" "I'll go then." "Yes, please," she said. Her voice was a little tight. More of it being she was nervous too, maybe. Maybe I was making things more complicated for her by still being up there. I quickly released the bridle and turned to make my way down the steps. They suddenly looked very steep and very long. "My name is Constance, by the way," she called out after me. I turned around to look at her. "I know," I said, and I turned back to tackle the stairs. It wasn't until I reached the bottom that I realized that I'd said that. I hadn't known her name. Why had I said it like that? And why hadn't I introduced myself to her? And why was I seemingly doing this just out of nowhere? I wasn't going to get anywhere with being a proud son of a gun, but sometimes it just peeked out of its hiding spot. I needed to hide it, but it was my stupid pride. I know, I wasn't some invisible kid who had no clue what he was doing or who anyone in this crowd of fancy people was. I knew things. There it was again, that tinge of shame at my behavior. It always followed me everywhere. Even when I felt so sure of myself, it was to remind me of the fact that never stopped me from doing the thing in the first place. No, that would be too helpful. I turned just in time to watch the girl fly through the air on Trix and land with a large splash in a small pool. Now that was bravery. Or stupidity. Not much difference between them, really, when you really think about it. The machine. Fear. Anger. Shame. All a whirlwind now. All one thing now. A feeling that is not. An existence that is not. And yet we are here. And yet we feel. Isn't it strange to not exist, and yet to be real? Thomas Connor. Seasick. Fantastic. That is why I hated boats. It was pretty straightforward. You get on the boat, it rocks, you feel like crap, end of story. See, I always had a reason why I thought what I think. There was always an explanation. When you try to explain to Allie why you took back your job after you were fired, after they stole your life's work from you, you try to explain to her that she didn't just get it, that it was infuriating me. There wasn't any reason she shouldn't understand. She's the one who stayed anyway, worked with the man still. So why was it so bad if I was the one who said yes? Yes, I'll have my job back. Yes, I'll fix a machine. Yes, I'll get out of the studio, out of the way of prying eyes and a far too curious writer girl at the studio. Yes, I'll go back to the job that never seemed to give a fig about me. What I did? What did I do? What did I do? You know, at my age, I was a bit too old for comic books, but I do once in a while glance at Superman. Heroes that could just save the day made me happy. It was so obvious for them. The line between right and wrong was obvious. I wish real life was that obvious. What's good, what's bad, clear and easy. I know what they did. I know what we did. But it's all invention, unlike anything before it. You can't just abandon something like that. Now, when you were so close. You don't abandon a kid because they break a few glasses. You don't abandon a kid because they cry out and smack you across the face by accident. A kid needs help growing up. You don't abandon your child. It's not just a machine, it's a miracle. You don't abandon a miracle, even if it scares you, even if it kills you. Chapter 4. Constance. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I smiled as Molly squeezed the air out of me. I really hoped whatever she had wasn't catching, but I wasn't about to tell her not to hug me. Couldn't hurt the poor girl's feelings. You're welcome, I wheezed instead. She backed off with a smile and held my hands in hers. The look of gratitude on her face was sweet and ridiculous. Both my sisters tend to act like they were performing in front of an audience at all times. But at least with Molly, there was a kind of sincerity to it. I swear you'll never have to do that again, she said. She sneezed into her hanky, releasing one of my hands but yanking my other to follow her. I allowed myself to be pulled towards her and Lily's bedrooms. Originally, I had shared with Lily, but she got frustrated by my silly science experiments, as she called them, that Molly had graciously offered to switch rooms with me. Oh, to be as sweet as Molly. Oh, I knew many people thought I was, but that's not the real me. I am always frustrated or on edge. Molly's intentions were purely kindness. It was okay, I replied. It's been a long time since I dove. Trix was a dear. Isn't she just a darling? Asked Molly as she threw open the door to the room. Ta-da! It took me a moment for me to see it among the faded florals that decorated the room. Clothes were everywhere as usual on Lily's bed, and my eyes were always drawn to the mess. I didn't even notice the blue flat box on Molly's. Until I did. Molly, you didn't, I said, releasing her hand, slowly walking towards her bed. I did! She was positively giddy, clapping her hands together like a child, and then froze and sneezed loudly. I flew towards the box and read the words that I knew were printed on it, with the picture of a creepy little boy holding a vial. Gilbert Chemistry Set. You got me the Master Chemistry Set? I asked in awe, scared to open the thing. Yes, I know you didn't want to dive, and I know you hate being the center of attention, you shy little thing. I just knew you wanted it. I mean, how could I not? You couldn't stop staring at it every time we passed old Doc's store. She continued on like that, telling my life story back to me as if it was new to me. I just placed the box on the bed and carefully opened it. Inside there were several dozen small bottles with bright orange labels, each detailing their contents. There were vials with strange powders, and a scale, and a magnet, and a book of experiments to try. I felt like tears were welling up in my eyes. I turned to Molly, who was still regaling me with her tale of magnificence, and grabbed her and squeezed her hand. Oh, shut her up. Oh, she said, startled. She hugged me back. This is the best gift anyone has gotten me, I said softly. Thank you, Molly. We broke apart, and I think she could see the tears then because she was flustered and had gone a little red. Well, as I said, I know that it's a big thing for you to do what you did today. It's so expensive, was all I could say back. Don't think about that, she said. I looked at her carefully. Molly, where did you get the money? She sighed and shook her head. Molly, did someone buy this for you? I asked. Another sigh. Molly, I know how you feel about men buying me presents, but I promise I'm a big girl, and besides, I like presents, especially if they're from my sisters, she said with a soft, sweet smile of hers. Everything about her appearance was soft and gentle. A round face, soft curves of her body, curly hair that never quite stayed in place. So much softness for someone who was such an athlete. I worried, was all I could say. I wanted to say so much more. I wanted to shake her and tell her that these men were not worth her time, that they were all creeps and she was so much better than them, that they were only wanting the soft illusion she put out onto the world, and not the real, funny, generous girl she was. That I worried about her reputation. Not that. Excuse me. Apologies. Not that. I personally thought how others did. But I knew others saw her and Lily. It was unfair, and made me extremely frustrated that boys who courted my sisters didn't have the exact same reputation concerns. They could get away with a lot more than us girls. Yet it was what it was. I didn't want people thinking negative things about us, about my lovely Molly. But I couldn't say things. I never could. I kept all such messy thoughts to myself. How could I say these things knowing how upset she would get? She was pleased to know that she got me this gift. I'm fine, Molly said. I was saved from blurting out something I might regret by Lily bursting into the room. Constance, come on, we're going to be late. I glanced at Molly and we shared a look. That look. Our look. That meant, oh, Lily. My 16-year-old sister was a whirlwind at best times, but before a show she was a tornado. There was nothing anyone could do but follow the path of destruction and try and put things back in order in its wake. I'm coming, I said. My hair was still damp. I knew I looked a fright, but I told myself it probably really didn't matter. I would be backstage. Besides, Lily liked that I looked like some kind of drowned rat. Not that she was an unkind person. She just liked being the center of attention. A lot. I looked one last time at Molly, who sat down on the bed and was now blowing her nose daintily. It was quite impressive that she could be so dainty and so disgusting at the same time. Thank you again. Constance! It was both a whine and a yell coming from the front door. You'd better go, replied Molly. I laughed and went to join Lily, who was already holding my gray wool coat outstretched for me. I grabbed it and put it on, clinching the belt tightly at my waist. No hat? She asked as we stepped onto the landing and closed the door behind us. You want me to take the time to pin it on? I asked, reaching in my pocket to grab my gloves. No, she replied with a pout, adjusting her own cloche hat on her head. Lily had such a silly sense of propriety, even as others given her the side-eye for dancing in such revealing costumes at the show. Even we've been met with a cold gust of wind as we stepped onto the street and turned left towards the boardwalk. Lily was walking at a pace that if she went any faster, we'd be jogging. I tried my best to keep up with her, but I fell behind slightly. I wanted to tell her to slow down. We weren't late. Everything was fine, but I didn't want to start an argument. So I walked there behind her, thinking about the day I'd had, of the dive into the freezing water in front of such a crowd and caught on film forever. I hoped I'd look professional and confident. I hoped I'd look pretty. No, don't think like that. There's more to life than looking pretty. Sometimes it's hard when your older sister is famous for flying through the air on a horse and your younger sister dances in sequins and feathers, not to wonder just a bit and care. I mindlessly touched the top of my head, still wet, and if the air got any colder, I might end up wearing a helmet of ice. I should have worn a hat. We arrived at the boardwalk and the winds picked up. The waves were crashing against the empty beach below. And I was grateful we'd done the dive when we had. The weather was churning itself up into a dangerous frenzy now. It was amazing that there were any tourists at all wandering the boardwalk. But there were. They came all year round, though in much smaller numbers now. Possibly tourist was the wrong word for these kinds of people. In the off-season, it seemed like the people who came to Atlantic City did it for business reasons, or for other, more illicit reasons. They weren't here to see the sights. They were here to escape into nightclubs or expensive restaurants, hole themselves in suites on the top floors of fantastic, fancy hotels. Speaking of, we entered the Ocean View Hotel and rushed through the lobby towards the theater doors of the Diamond Lounge. Thank you, Jack, I called out behind me to the doorman, who touched the tip of his hat in return. We flew through the theater doors. The house lights were up, making the magic of the space disappear into the dark corners, and the blandness of the room was brought into stark relief. The stains on the carpet, the peeling wallpaper, the scratches and notches on the furniture. There you are, said Mac, the stage manager, who was adjusting the legs of the curtain stage right, one of his huge cigars dangling out the corner of his mouth. Be careful, Mac. You might light the place on fire, said Liz with a lilting laugh. Never have before, he replied with a grin. Hey, Mac, I said as Lily rushed past him towards the backstage. Hey there, kiddo, he replied. What's new with the great scientist? I shook my head. It was embarrassing that he called me that. Ever since he found out I was keen on chemistry, he thought I was some kind of scientist or something, which I really wasn't. Not one bit. But of course, he enjoyed calling me that, and I didn't want to upset him by telling him not to. Speaking of which, I said intently, Molly got me the chemistry set. Did she now? Well, isn't that such a nice thing for a sister to do? It really is, I was thinking. Maybe I could figure out some of those fog effects you were looking for, I replied. My stomach got all fluttery at the thought. Now that would be excellent. You do that, and we'll pay you for the privilege. Don't you worry. Mac was always so enthusiastic about everything. It was sometimes hard to tell if he was being sincere, but he was. He was just that lovely. I smiled and looked over his shoulder into the back, and back at me again. You better get back there. It's chaos already. Really? It's just a Tuesday night show. Chaos doesn't care what day of the week it is, he replied, taking a puff of his cigar. I really didn't understand his point, but I smiled and quickly made my way backstage. Rows of mirrors framed with lights were engaged with rows of girls sitting in front of them, poking and prodding at their faces, adding color and highlights. Other girls stood, pulling up stockings and throwing their street clothes over the chairs while rushing to grab their costumes off the rack. There definitely was a chaotic energy. As the girls got ready for the show, I was their dresser, assistant, wherever they needed to make sure they got on stage on cue and looked fabulous. Sometimes buttons needed to be sewn on, sometimes headpieces needed more hairpins, that sort of thing. It was a relatively easy job when the girls were in a fluster like they were today. Constance, help! A bedazzled Naomi jumped in front of me and presented me her back. With my gloves still on, I did up her buttons and she flew away back to her mirror the moment my fingers released her. I quickly peeled off my coat and gloves and tossed them on one of the empty chairs. I was accosted by 3 girls talking a mile a minute over one another. I nodded at their requests, not fully understanding them, and feeling overwhelmed by the energy and panic. This was definitely turning out to be one of those days. Well, Brant, not now. Mr. Clark sat down heavily behind the desk and took off his hat. Just so everyone knows, this is Chapter 5, Brant. He rubbed his bald head a few times, like he was about to make a wish. Yes, now, Mr. Clark, I said, bravery or stupidity doesn't matter. It has been a long morning with that stupid horse thing, he said. Yes, I know, but you also promised me a byline if I was a stupid horse helper, and I have a doozy of an idea. I sat in the chair opposite of him without being asked to. I was feeling pretty invincible, to tell the truth. Pitch me fast, said Mr. Clark. I nodded and scooted to the edge of my seat. My arms rose as my hands started moving in the air as I spoke. Yeah, I was an energetic speaker, broke some stuff as a kid in the apartment, got in trouble, and did it again, over and over. Last week, in fact. That rich kid and his dad, I said. The ones making the tourist film today. Yes, that rich kid and his dad, otherwise known as William and Emmett Chambers, the latter being the man who owns half of Atlantic City. Excuse me. Well, that's my point. How about an expose on the corruption in Atlantic City, with Mr. Chambers at the center of it? Sounded pretty swell to me. How about that? Replied Mr. Clark, decidedly not that enthused. It's a solid story, I said. It's an old story. It's a known story. You told me there's corruption in Atlantic City, the home, probably more defunct speakeasies in New York, the city that probation made rich? Wow, Brent, I had no idea. Mr. Clark looked at me with his exhausted expression, a world-weary sigh escaping his lip. You youngsters are all the same. Pitching old ideas is new because you've never read the old stuff. You can't ignore history, son. And no one's interested in corruption anymore. Not after the war. They just want to live their lives, however they're funded. You got me? Oh, I got him, all right. I shook my head. It wasn't fair. You mean the same way this paper is funded? Mr. Clark didn't get angry at that. He just stared blankly at me for a moment and said, Yep. Right. I had to think quick. I didn't have any other pitches but this one. But I knew it was a good one. I just had to convince Mr. Clark I was right. Okay, it's old news. But what if we offer a new perspective? Brent, I really need a quiet moment on my own here. The rich kid, the one at the horse diving this morning. William, you said his name was... What about him? Just tell me your idea. These questions are giving me a headache. He pinched the bridge of his nose as he said that, in case I didn't believe him. But I did. There were very few things that didn't give Mr. Clark a headache. You could tell that he and his father don't exactly get on. That it isn't all hunky-dory there. I bet befriending his son could lead to some pretty interesting information. Mr. Clark sighed, leaned back in his chair. He swiveled around so his back was to me, and he was looking out his unwashed windows, caked with layers of dirt and salt from the sea. Look, he said, another sigh. Write the story you want to write, and if it's good, it'll go in the paper. If it's not good, I promise you I will not publish it. But just because I promised you a byline doesn't mean I publish anything that crosses my desk. Still gotta be good, or at least not embarrassing to the paper. That was enough. That's real swell of you, Mr. Clark. Real swell. I won't let you down. I promise. I already have a lead. It's a party. A killer diller of a party. Mr. Clark, looks like some toughs from New York City are coming to meet with Mr. Chambers, and he wants to show off a good time. I got a friend who has Enough! Interrupted Mr. Clark. Get out of my office, Brant. Didn't have to tell me twice. Sure thing, Mr. Clark, and thank you, Mr. Clark. I was excited. This was finally it. Finally, I was getting my chances to prove that I could do more than deliver the mail. You've got to make them see you. No one else is going to do that for you. Another reason and lesson from my uncle. I was darn tired of being invisible. It was time to be noticed. Well, everyone, that is chapter 5. We are now chapter 6. So this video, we went from reading from chapter 2 to chapter 5. Tomorrow's video will be chapter 6 to chapter 10. If you have any requests on music, on reading types, anything, please let me know in the comments below. But other than that, I will leave you guys with this lo-fi as I finish getting everything ready. Alright, well, I hope you all enjoyed today's reading, and I hope you all have a great time. Thank you for staying, and see you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye.